What is going on, gamers? I want to talk about, three things that kind of went on this past week with Bungie and really kind of Destiny 2. It was kind of a very interesting week last week. You thought it was going to be done in like one day, but it was like every day over the past week. It was like something new kept coming out from Bungie. So, quick wrap up, and then I'll get to sharing three things. So, last week, they laid off about 100 people. They pushed back their new expansion, the final shape, back to, I believe, June or July, something like that. And they are also missing like 45%, probably more than that now, because there's been a lot of people actually take back their pre-orders. So it's probably over 50% of their forecasted revenue going into the final shape. So I don't know really if that's pre-orders or whatnot. We didn't really get a full breakdown on that. It was just kind of the so-called report. And we also heard from a lot of different people, from Bloomberg to Paul Tassi to Astacross, on some of the different sources that they have and some of the information that they were able to put together. So definitely great shout out to those guys for putting together a lot of this stuff. And definitely a lot of information came from employees that were formerly part of Bungie, like DMG, and even some of those that got laid off, kind of saying like, hey, there's a lot of blame to go around and management is a big issue. And, that's kind of what happens when people get laid off. People like to point fingers and stuff like that. But hey, if you got laid off, definitely, feel for you. But hey, get out there, go get the job hunt going, because you're now competing with your former coworkers or whatnot. So get out there, get going. I'm sure you'll make do in the best in your future. Use this as a great learning experience. So a lot of that stuff was very interesting to hear about last week. And it's kind of interesting because we got a little bit of the writing on the wall, per se, or, there was some issues kind of going on over the past couple months. And, even though I haven't played Destiny 2 since about May, there have been other issues even before this past week. There were some issues a couple months ago, and even Joe Blackburn had to come out and say, hey, you know what, I'm going to be live streaming like once a week. And he's been doing, from what I've heard, pretty good, kind of interacting there with the community and kind of answering questions and stuff like that. So that's really good. You always want to hear, from those that are in charge of making a game, because they kind of run not just the game, but the community in sense. So that's been kind of good to hear. But it was kind of fishy that he was even doing it back then. So it just kind of makes sense that there was issues back then that led to this, right? And where there's even some reports coming out over the past few days that these layoffs that happened last week and the delay of the final shape were actually looked at a few months ago. It's not like this just came up here over the past week or two or three or even the past month. Like, this has been kind of going on for a while, and it just finally kind of hit ahead here. So three things that really kind of stood out to me, really, is do not expect that layoffs are going to be done. I would expect more layoffs to come, and most likely it will come after the final shape. Now, I'm not calling for anybody to get fired or laid off. That's not what I'm saying. It's just typically you see this in other businesses, other sectors across the economy, not even just game development, but, game development's getting hit pretty hard this year. So it just happens. This is kind of what happens. But the main thing here is, from what we've heard in these reports, some of the information we've got over the past week, is really the areas that got hit the hardest weren't really in game development so much. They were mostly like community managers, I've heard, got hit really hard. And also the security team, which is there to kind of monitor hackers that are in the game and stuff like that. So yeah, we'll see what happens going forward, because as we get to the final shape and then past it, what is going to be the plan for Destiny 2? And if there's not much of one, and if they're still monitoring revenues and, they're not bringing in the money, then obviously, I would expect to see some layoffs come at that point in time, but come from the team that's actually developing the game, or more that are coming from developing the game. I'm sure there are some teams that got hit from game development, but, we'll see. I just wouldn't expect this to be the end of any kind of layoffs. I'd expect more to come down the line. Now, a big reason why companies actually do go through layoffs is really because the company gets too bloated. So how did Bungie get so bloated? I'm going to kind of go through the past couple of years quickly, but kind of just go over some things about why Bungie wound up getting so bloated. Well, let's go back to the pandemic. Yes, the pandemic. If we all remember back in the pandemic, there was a lot of studios that were having massive layoffs, and they were also just going out of business. They were just going out of business. So the fact that Bungie was able to skirt by without major damage, they might have laid off some people. They might have, I don't really remember anything major back then, but back then there was a lot more going on than just worrying about Bungie's layoffs. So the fact that they were able to keep the ship afloat and keep it going, even though they did have some delays, they even cut, probably what was some Beyond Light content. That, it is what it is. You kind of have to, make through tough times. And, they did. And really, they had a game that, for the most part, didn't really have major issues back then. Well, one of the things that brought a lot of people to, video games, and I would say Destiny 2 back then was, well, everybody was staying home. Everybody was told to stay home and just kind of be locked in. And so video game sales, console sales, they all skyrocketed. We all kind of know that generality. But one of the things that has happened here over the past year, I would say even maybe a little longer than a year, is people have gotten back to normality. People have kind of gone back to, if they travel for work. I've got some buddies that played Destiny 2 over the past couple of years, and about a year ago, a little bit over a year ago, they got back to traveling for work. So things are starting to get back to normal. And this is where, well, those gamers are leaving not just Destiny 2, but they're leaving, gaming. So a lot of people that came into gaming are also people that are leaving gaming and getting back to their normal lives. But, it's not all for loss, because I'm sure there are people that have picked up gaming over the past couple of years and are now kind of sticking with it, which is good. Maybe the industry actually did benefit from it, but some people are going to be leaving gaming. So, and I wouldn't expect that trend to probably stop anytime soon. Maybe here over the next year, we'll probably see it normalize out. But the other thing that really kind of spurred out from the pandemic, like I mentioned, there was a lot of layoffs, and there was a lot of companies and studios that went out of business. That led to the past couple of years where there was no major gaming competition. It was very light. Back in 2021, there wasn't much. There really wasn't. Last year, 2022, there wasn't much. There was maybe one or two games both of those years that were top-notch type of games that were kind of looked at. So yeah, there wasn't really a lot of competition in the space, especially those that kind of compete in the Destiny 2 area of gaming. And then we get to this year, 2023. And we've basically had a really top-notch game roughly every 6 weeks throughout this year. Whether they've wound up being big time or they were just highly anticipated and, they just pulled gamers away from Destiny 2. Those are, different things that we can kind of quantify. But the thing is this year has just been a lot of top-notch games that other people or gamers have said, okay, I'm kind of stale on Destiny 2. I want something else to play also. And there's been a lot of great games this year to kind of go give it a shot out. So that kind of leads to a big drop in your forecast and your revenue. So yeah, that's kind of why Destiny kind of got bloated and why it's getting unbloated kind of all at once. In my opinion, people are getting back to normal, and you're having a lot of those games that were highly anticipated coming out this year, kind of taking those gamers away. Now, the last one I want to talk about is from a Paul Tassi article. It was basically a line here, but it's about revenues. And here, this revenue line, the trend line of spending on the game over time made the current year's revenues estimates somewhat logical. Now, this is a very interesting line. I'm not going to lie, because, well, I am a financial analyst. I'm a financial analyst by profession. I do trading, I do investing, and I've never heard of financial analysts doing a methodology like this. So maybe there's something lost in translation, coming from maybe Paul Tassi's source or whatnot. I'm not going to blame Paul Tassi for, writing up what he did. But if they forecast revenues based on expenses. They're doing it backwards. What you want to do is you want to get an estimate of revenues and then figure out how much you can expense on the game or whatever you're developing. That is how you do forecasts. That's how you do game forecasts, revenue forecasts, software forecasts, that kind of stuff. So that is what was very interesting when I heard that, when I saw that, because that makes no sense. And if their leadership team, their forecasters, their finance people, whoever are really just that dumb, then yeah, it makes sense that Bungie's having a hard time right now. Makes sense, because the way you want to actually finance or make projections, financial projections, is really you want to see how much money we can make with a product, right? Now you want to see, okay, we have pre-orders that we can probably bring in that will help bring up revenues, that we can use that money to kind of help supplement some of the costs over a certain period of time. And this is one reason why I always preach, do not pre-order, because you should not finance their project. Okay, I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. But if you think you can make certain amount of revenue, you need to figure out, are we going to be able to make that revenue before the game releases, or kind of like at the game releases, and then maybe, see, if you make up some of that revenue after the game releases or something like that. But you want to know kind of where the money is flowing in so that you can pay for your expenses. Now, that matters a great deal, because if you think the revenue will come in at or after the time of release, then you're going to need to finance the front end, right? You'd have to take on debt. You'd have to basically just take out a loan with your bank and pay for the costs, right? That's kind of the way you would normally do it. So that's where this makes no sense as far as our expenses or our spending over time, and then they use that to then estimate revenues. Like that doesn't mean anything. That doesn't matter. Those are two different things you need to forecast. So just kind of interesting to hear that, and maybe that is why Bungie is having some real issues with the finances right now. So anyways, that's kind of all I wanted to talk about, and hopefully they can kind of get it going, because I will be getting the final shape and look forward to seeing what happens at the end. But I've kind of grown stale of Destiny 2 myself. That's why I haven't played it in several months. Hopefully they can fix a lot of things, and maybe we can see Destiny continue to go down the line. Alrighty, take care.